Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and patch 9.1 is going to bring in a lot of updates. It's only been 2 weeks of PTR, and not everything has been added to the testing servers just yet. But slowly and surely, Blizzard is rolling major updates into the next patch. And one of the major updates that's coming out in 9.1 is actually a Mythic Plus RAIDER IO style scoring system that's going to be integrated into World of Warcraft. Blizzard is a pretty big fan of how popular Mythic Pluses are and how crucial the RAIDER IO add-on scoring is to the actual Mythic Plus experience for so many players, whether you're trying to push keys or just trying to get you weeklies out of the way. So they're going to be incorporating their version of a Mythic Plus scoring system. In this video, I want to talk about what we know of it so far, since it hasn't been added yet. What are some of the pitfalls that could be in there, but what are some of the positives that could come out of adding a system like this into patch 9.1? If you guys watch my regular content, you know that I like keys. I always have some B-roll of me doing some Mythic Pluses, and on streams, 5 to 7 East Coast, by the way, every single day except for Thursday and Sunday, which should be Sunday by the time this video releases, we try to get our ults done for the weekly, and also sometimes on stream we try to get some keys done for pushes. Keys are super fun. It makes dungeons a lot more important ever since they decided to go with that system back in Legion. I remember playing back in Cataclysm, World of Warcraft is when I started, and I remember once you do the dungeon, you never really go back for them unless you have some ults and you want to get some free easy gear from heroics. You really didn't ever want to do dungeons ever, because raids was kind of like the main PvE attraction, or you were PvPing inside of arenas and battlegrounds. But ever since Legion, Blizzard added the system of Mythic Pluses, and so many players have enjoyed it. It adds so much replayability to the same dungeon mechanics and also makes them even more important. All these dungeon mechanics that you have to follow in heroics and normals, you can usually just ignore and just rush the boss down. But in Mythic Plus content, the dungeon boss mechanics actually start to matter, especially as you get into the higher ranks of those dungeon mechanics. The ads become actually deadly. The bosses themselves are actually pretty challenging. And I think it's really good. It keeps the dungeons relevant throughout the seasonal content or the expansion's lifetime. Not just like a one and done experience, get some gear, move on to your raids, but actually you can start pushing Mythic Pluses and it becomes a third leg of the end game content for World of Warcraft. I feel like the affixes give the dungeons a little bit of freshness and variety, so every time you run the dungeon every single week, something is a little different. And over time, it just really became a portion of World of Warcraft that we just kind of take for granted nowadays. So Blizzard wants to do some major revamps towards the patch 9.1 Mythic Plus content. For quite a while, players have been using the RAIDER IO add-on that kind of tells you your RAIDER IO score. The RAIDER IO score is calculated by taking the difficulty of your key, as in what level it was finished in, whether it was finished or not, as well as the speed in terms of how fast were you able to finish. So if you fail a key, you'll get a set amount of score, but if you complete it, the score is higher. If you complete this key in a faster time than your last one, you'll get an even higher score. And sometimes tackling a more challenging key can give you the most amount of score, even if you end up failing it. On paper, RAIDER IO add-on and the scoring system isn't terrible, as it encourages players to want to run a variety of different keys. For example, you get rewarded with more score if you do one of every dungeon and you complete it on time at some level, rather than, let's say, doing really well in one dungeon and not as great in any of the others. This means that it encourages players to want to explore all the different dungeons, see all the boss mechanics, and actually be able to execute them properly. So on paper, it should create a well-rounded player, but we all know there are some definite issues with the RAIDER IO system. And if Blizzard is going to be adding this RAIDER IO system, there are definitely some of the things we gotta consider. But first, let's take some of the facts, some of the interviews with Ian himself, talking about what Blizzard is planning for the RAIDER IO system for now, and then break down where some of the advantages of it could be, but also where some of the concerns come from. If you guys want to read the full interview or even watch the full interview, I have a link down below where you guys can do that. It's through Wowhead, and there was an interview with Ian himself who talked about some of the future content planned for Mythic Pluses. As of right now in PTR, there's nothing exactly that exists, so this is the first bit of information of Blizzard actually talking about what this Mythic Plus system will look like. This video will not cover the full interview, but primarily the main bullet points for us to cover. The first thing we get to find out, however, is the fact that it's going to be very similar to like a rating system for PvP. PvP system is pretty simple. It gives you rating based on if you win the game or if you lose the game, and based on your MMR, it determines how many points you gain or how many points you lose. In Mythic Pluses, however, it's gonna be apparently more complicated. We find out that this system is going to count tyrannical and fortified keys separately to encourage players to master both rather than just easier one. And this is one of the things we already see with RAIDER. Lots of people are going to be pushing during the fortified weeks. Fortified weeks are generally a lot easier than that of tyrannical. The adds just don't obliterate players nearly as easily, and with careful play, maybe with some slows for the tank and a demon hunter tank who could just run around the room kiting the mobs with snap aggro, for the most part you don't really even need to deal with the mobs, except for a few scary ones. On tyrannical, the things are different. First of all, the bosses themselves are scarier. On high enough keys, the boss is literally one shot and there's no amount of healing that will prevent it. So unless you're running certain classes with crazy immunities and maybe with a bit of RNG, you might be able to get past them. But also these bosses take a while. So the boss fights can go up to 4 minutes just DPSing down the boss. And if something goes wrong after those 4 minutes, that's the time you're not really going to gain. Especially, let's say your group needs Bloodlust. You need a Prideful buff in order to be able to do that boss. Something goes wrong, maybe out of your hand, maybe some kind of RNG, and that's it. The key is basically over. You're not going to be able to time it, but the group falls apart. Compared to fortified, if let's say you wipe on a trash bag, at most maybe you spend maybe a minute in the trash bag, you can just kind of go again. On a boss that requires a lot of commitment, if one thing goes wrong, be it RNG or player performance, it's over. The key can sometimes just be a dead key. So tyrannical, for the most part, to players just feels so much more punishing compared to fortified, which feels so much easier. And talk about pugs. Pugs, for one reason or another, in my experience, just have a harder time when dealing with tyrannical compared to fortified, where people just kind of running in, busting cooldowns left and right, and bosses are no issue. So Blizzard adding a different rating system based on tyrannical. Fortified is an interesting take, but I feel like the one thing they totally could do is maybe just take tyrannical and fortified affix out of the game completely. I think it would just get more people to want to play either way. And for tyrannical to build up a different score compared to fortified, with this new system, I feel like you're just going to get players who are dreading, oh, no, it's tyrannical, but I gotta get my score in tyrannical. I feel like take out tyrannical and fortified and scale the keys where bosses and adds kind of scale together. I think that kind of system honestly could be better going forward. They also talked about how the system could potentially replace a Valor upgrade achievement system, where right now you have to get all keys down on a 5 or a 10 or 15, but it is at least account wide. So this system would kind of be like the PvP system. The higher rating you get in PvP, the better the gear you can earn. So per player, this system would mean that if you have a certain score on your main, does that system translate to your alts? Because right now, RAIDER.io and the achievement system works for your alts pretty well. I just don't really know how that will work out for your alts, and that's something I would want to touch on a little bit later in the video. They also say they would like to give more players control over the group finder, specific dungeons, completion versus timing, etc. So it looks like this this score system for Blizzard version of RAIDER.io should have a lot of information. You should be able to see a lot of data, as in how well those players ran. On RAIDER.io, that's one of the things that you don't really get to see unless you go on the website itself, because the add-on provides quite a bit of info, but not sometimes nearly as much info as you would want to personally see. Like, how well did those players do? Yeah, their score might not be super fantastic, amazing, but have they done this key on this specific week with these specific affixes? How well did they do? How well did they time it? Because maybe their score isn't amazing, but they're really good at that sanguine depths, and they're really good at doing the bosses, and they generally get good time for it. So maybe if you find a tank that's not a meta demon hunter tank, but they at least done the sanguine depths, you'd be able to see that that tank done it, and now you'd have more confidence bringing that guy in, rather than just this score itself. If Blizzard can somehow showcase more data, that would be very interesting. But again, talk about that in a little bit. They also talked about how several affixes disrupt melee compared to ranged, and we have seen a lot more ranged in Mythic Pluses. At most, you'll have the tank and one melee for the big push groups, and the dominance of multiple Outlaw rogues and a Windwalker monk with a protection. But the way they've done it is not by making the mechanics easy. Well, I guess they kind of did make certain mechanics easier for range, but also they added affixes that are just worse for melee. Storming and Spiteful can be pretty deadly. Storming isn't too bad, it just kind of knocks you up in the air, but if let's say there's a mechanic where you have to move out of the way, now you're just in the air. You can't really move. Unless you have a grapple hook as an outlaw, you're kind of just stuck. Spitefuls are spiteful. These guys are ruthless, and especially when they had that extra range to them on the melee, you didn't want to be anywhere near them as soon as they spawned. So it's going to be very interesting how Blizzard is going to end up balancing these things, and I wonder if we will be able to see a little bit more equality between the ranged and melee in the future. And they also talked about how there is no seasonal affix for them to talk about just yet. Hopefully we'll see something like that on the PTR very, very soon. But one thing I'm really excited with the seasonal affix for patch 9.1 is if they can somehow incorporate the prideful mechanic of you gain mana after you do whatever the seasonal affix mechanic is. If they can somehow do that, I think that'd be awesome, because prideful has been great. You don't have to sit down for your healers to drink up for mana. You just fight this prideful mob and then you just go to the next mob and the next mob. Some healers have a mana issue, but for the most part, it solves a lot of that sitting down, having to drink, you know, the slowdown. It keeps the dungeons active, and I really like that. Hopefully they'll incorporate something like that going into 9.1. Finally, they also talked about how they're not adding any new affixes for the second season. They're rather going to be working on the current ones, and maybe that's good. Fine-tuning the affixes themselves and the seasonal affix, I feel it can be enough to change up the pace of the next season just by itself. For example, and this is the best example I have, is Battle for Azeroth Season 4. Prior to Battle for Azeroth Season 4, you kind of wanted a rogue in every group. Maybe not Season 1, but you wanted a rogue in most groups because, well, rogues bring Shroud, and this lets you skip certain mobs that you really don't want to do. Otherwise, you have to pull them, and then your percent is a little bit off, and then you're having to maybe pull mobs that you don't really want to touch in the first place because they're really challenging. So with a rogue, you could skip all those. But with Season 4, they added an obelisk system where you go into an obelisk, you fight this minion on N'Zoth, and where that minion dies is where the portal comes out, so you can fight this minion while also shrouding your whole team in this other world of N'Zothian horror creatures. And this is awesome. It kind of took the rogues out of the strong meta, but it allowed more classes to be competitive and playable, and allowed more opportunities for players to tackle dungeons in different ways. So seasonal affixes by themselves can really transform the way we play our keys. So I'm really excited for them to just take the time to iron that stuff out. So now we have an idea of what the system might look like. Not exactly the scoring itself, and hopefully we'll be able to check that out on PTR very soon. But this does look kind of good, especially if they can add the detailed aspects to it. So let's talk about some of the possibilities that could be good out of the system, but also some of the pitfalls that should be considered. Some of my personal thoughts about it. First of all, my alts have a much easier time with the current system of RAIDER IO as well as the achievement system to get into keys. The RAIDER IO add-on tracks who your main is and how much score that main has. This is what allows my alts to be able to get into some of the 14s, 15s, 10s, 11s, whatever the item level appropriate key that some of my alts have been able to get into, and most of them have been timed. A lot of players believe that it's all about the item level. You want to have the best gear, but in fact, most people that do keys, they really care about the experience. In the RAIDER IO score, it tells you the experience of the player. Have they done one of every key? Have those keys been done at a higher level? And all that info that you can gain from the RAIDER IO score itself. So that's how my alts get around. My main has a decent score, my alts have a bit of gear, it tells them that I'm a player that knows my way around these dungeons, I'm just playing on an alt, and they usually get in. This kind of system with RAIDER IO allows my alts to get in based on the score from my main. So I'm wondering if this kind of system will stay, or are we just going to have to start linking people KSM achievements? Because there have been some moments where I link people KSM and they say, oh, you could have just bought it. I don't know if you actually have KSM. But the RAIDER IO system shows you the tracked information. And that's, I guess you can kind of buy it, but it's not really common that people buy a RAIDER IO score. This is my score. This is my main score. You can see the experience from my main, and that shows up whenever I apply for these dungeons on my alts. I wonder if that system will stay with the new WoW scoring system. Another question is the nuance of information, as Blizzard is talking about adding a lot of info in terms of how fast the key was ran, what affixes it was run on, if it was a complete or not, and that's something you apparently are supposed to be able to see from the World of Warcraft, like from in-game. Normally with RAIDER IO, if you want to see that kind of detailed information, you actually have to go on the RAIDER IO website, which quite a lot of people do. You can see all the runs, how fast you completed them, if you have any failed runs, if you have any successful runs. The RAIDER IO add-on tells you a bit of information. It mostly shows you people's updated score and if they've done a certain dungeon, if they timed it. But if you're looking for more of that detailed information where a player, let's say doesn't have the great overall score, but they're really decent at tank, they've done pretty well, they've done this one dungeon really well at the affix you're about to run. So you're like, you know what, this guy's done it before, he's been around the block, he's timed it, he has plenty of good time on it, I'll take him. His overall score isn't amazing, but you know what, maybe he's just trying to get his weekly done. I think this could be even more helpful for players, and the way that Blizzard builds it can be even better than the current RAIDER IO system we have right now. It could help players to find the groups they need, to be a little bit more specified in terms of who do they want, what kind of player they're looking for, what is the experience of that player. It could give you so much more information and give you a much better decision-making experience. Another question that I have about RAIDER.io and this kind of system being added into World of Warcraft. By quite a few players, RAIDER.io system has a perception of, oh, this is just a toxic system to gatekeep players out of keys. But maybe it won't be too bad. I mean, remember gear score system back in Wrath? I don't, because I didn't play back in Wrath. But the idea behind it was it gave you a score based on the gear you had. The better the gear, the better the score, but you also could gain advantages in the scoring by making sure you had proper enchants and proper gems in your gear and you were wearing the best stuff you could get. So players that were incentivized then to gem up the character, make sure to buy all the consumables, make sure to buy all your enchants for your character, make sure to take care of your character so you're ready to go into the next raid. On paper, it was good. Of course, players misused that system, requiring crazy gear score to get into groups, and players would cheese the system to get gear, like a druid would get a bunch of cloth gear, put sockets into it, and the gear score system told him, oh, you socketed out, you actually have a higher gear score, but they're wearing cloth gear, whereas the druid, they're supposed to be wearing leather. So people would cheese these kind of systems, and eventually it made it into the game. And I know that item level is kind of important in Shadowlands, and some people do abuse the item level, like requiring, you know, for this +5 to 226 geared characters to join. But most people don't really abuse that system that much. But then again, with the item level, we also have the RAIDER.io system. So if someone doesn't have the greatest item level, but has a decent RAIDER.io score, you'll probably take the guy with the RAIDER.io. So maybe it won't be that bad. Maybe it will be bad because some people hate RAIDER.io system completely. And I guess I'm just trying to find out, is this going to be good for the game or is this not? Is it going to be just like how gear score became item level and then people didn't really care that much? Or is it going to be worse than that? I guess that's what I'm trying to find out. Because quite a lot of people have a really bad perception of RAIDER.io, and including that into the game might make a lot of people upset. And I'm just wondering how that's all going to work out, I guess. Like, we know that Blizzard is adding some sort of a score system, and I think there's a couple steps it can take that we talked about in this video where they could make it even a better system than RAIDER.io is. Even though RAIDER.io is great, I feel like they could add more tools into the scoring for Mythic Plus to give players more of an idea of what kind of players they're getting into groups. So it's a system that hopefully will not get misused as RAIDER.io has been in the past. A system that gives you a lot more information, that takes a lot of things into account, and hopefully will work out really well. It's a new system being added in 9.1. I cannot wait to test it out. I definitely had some thoughts on it, and I wanted to express those thoughts in today's video. And I want you guys to let me know, what do you think about the Mythic Plus scoring system going forward into Shadowlands? Do you think it's a good idea on paper? How do you hope it works out? And we'll make sure to update you guys on the system as soon as we have something that we can play with once it hits PTR. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you guys want to see more updates for 9.1, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And as always, I'll see you guys in another video.